The last time I watched Snow White, I was 16 years old, and I do not need to see it again. I remember how furious I was as I watched this beautiful, young, innocent girl clean a house for 12 grown men, many of whom were not particularly appreciative. And then I watched in shock as she got kissed by a stranger twice her age while she was sleeping. I remember going up to my mom once it was over and with all the self-righteous indignation I could muster declaring, "This is why I'm a feminist." I think it might have been the first time I ever actually called myself a feminist out loud. It's funny to me now that there was ever a time when I did not explicitly describe myself this way, because for as long as I can remember, caring about equal rights for women has been such an important part of who I am. Before a person knows much else about me, they know that I care a lot about women's rights. Even in my career, I work to address health disparities between men and women that occur as a result of systemic sexism. Health disparities are the preventable differences in health between different groups of people, where those who are socially disadvantaged experience worse health than those who are socially advantaged. In spite of the tremendous progress for women that we have seen over the past century, UN Women still reports that there is not a single country on earth where women and girls are equal to men and boys. In every corner of our world, women still face the unfair burden of systemic sexism. Women are therefore the socially disadvantaged group in comparison to men everywhere. Because of this, we see endless examples of health disparities, from heart health research benefiting men over women simply because the male body is used as the norm in our studies, to women's pain, and in particular, Black women's pain being taken less seriously than that of a man after a procedure. We even see this in our everyday lives. Our very cars are out to get us. Despite the fact that women cause fewer car accidents in general, when we are in a car accident, we are significantly more likely to die than a man because our very cars are designed around the male body. Go home and Google this. You will find a lot of examples that will shock you. And somewhere deep in that Google search, you will find an example from Rusinga Island on Lake Victoria in West Kenya. I spent the summer of 2010 on Rusinga Island, where I was hosted by a remarkable woman named Mama Tony and her family. My colleague and I were there to research the HIV epidemic and to write a grant proposal for a new HIV health clinic for the island. In 2010, when we were there, the prevalence of HIV amongst adult Kenyans was 6%, making it the 11th highest in the world. But on Rusinga Island, where we were, it was closer to 40%. But the rate of HIV was not and is not even across the island. Of its many villages, some have been hit worse than others by the epidemic. And one of those villages that had been hit particularly hard was a small fishing community that we visited on the edge of the lake. This small fishing community was comprised of almost entirely women and their children. And it was estimated that as many as 95% of them were HIV positive. 95%. That is almost every single woman and child in this community. This devastating statistic is a result of the unique circumstances that small fishing communities like this one face on the edge of Lake Victoria. As the only economic opportunity available to them, every single man and boy old enough to get in a boat was a fisherman. As they followed the fish around the lake, they pulled ashore at many villages just like this one, and at each one they had a girlfriend with whom they traded fish for sex while simultaneously spreading HIV. Meanwhile, these girlfriends did not have any economic opportunity available to them outside trading their bodies for fish. In this highly patriarchal society, fishing is a man's job. And unlike the villages just 1 mile farther inland, This small beachside community did not have enough land for substantial farming, the only other major source of food and money on the island. Sexist beliefs barred these women from pursuing any culturally acceptable means of making money, and then placed the blame for the epidemic firmly on their shoulders. HIV spreads primarily through sex. And yet women in this culture are expected to be virtuous and virginal. Therefore, it is a widely held belief that the reason HIV is spreading is because promiscuous, unmarried women are breaking these moral guidelines and having sex. And as punishment, these women, and especially women like the ones in this village, are ostracized, only leading to further isolation, reduced resources, and diminished opportunities. Maintaining these strict gender roles was only serving to contribute to this health crisis. And so in order to address this health crisis, we had to look beyond a health lens. We had to talk about gender. We had to talk about the fact that gender inequality was an integral part of this issue. And so, as my colleague and I wrote a grant proposal for a new HIV health clinic, we also partnered with the primary school where Mama Tony's kids attended. With them, we piloted a sexual health and gender equality workshop for all of the students, and they responded with unexpected enthusiasm. They were open to the idea that their culture's strict gender roles and the spread of HIV were deeply interconnected. And in the face of this realization, which presented an impossible problem for the community responded by tackling this problem head on. They responded by coming up with new, creative solutions. First, they looked at the role of men and boys. While I was there, they ran a soccer program for the boys every weekend, and at halftime they would bring them into the middle of the field, and they would talk about HIV and sex. And in that sexual health education program that we piloted at the primary school, we were invited to talk about gender roles and gender inequality, not only with the girls, but also with the boys. Second, they continued to invest in their health system. Not only did they ask us to write a grant proposal for a new HIV health clinic that would be accessible to even the most impoverished families, but they continued to invest in the health clinic they already had. This is what the health clinic looked like in 2010. It was extremely run down. And this is what it looks like now. They are able to run tests, draw blood, test for HIV, and they run a ton of health fairs for their community. And they are still advocating for more resources from their partners and from their government. And third, they decided to elevate the status of women. Since I left, they have run multiple programs specifically focused on empowering girls, one that tries to keep them in schools, one focused on getting them the feminine hygiene products that they need, and one specifically focused on family planning. And Mama Tony, that remarkable woman who hosted us, she founded a women's microfinance lending program that increases the financial independence of its participants. The island faced what felt like an impossible problem. A problem that forced them to look at their very culture and beliefs and reevaluate their priorities in order to save their future. But in the face of that impossible problem, they decided to confront it, to come up with new creative solutions, to take responsibility for what was in their control, and to do it together. I left the island in 2010, but I've maintained a relationship with the community's leaders as they've strived to lower the rate of HIV while simultaneously raising the status of women. Every year since I left, Mama Tony has sent me a handwritten letter. In the beginning, her letters were newsy and conversational. She bragged about her really cool kids. She shared progress on all the amazing things that her community was doing, and she teased me a lot for not having given her any grandkids yet. But as the years passed, I noticed a trend that hadn't been there at first. Mama Tony's formerly cheerful letters were shifting in focus. Something was happening on Rusinga Island that had nothing to do with HIV or gender inequality. In this letter from 2016, Mama Tony wrote me this: "It's too hot here. There is no rain from last year. People did not get enough grains, so there is a lot of famine. We hope when it rained by November, it might be a little better." And just this past September of 2019, she wrote me this: "This year, the harvest was so poor because of lack of rain. Like in our family, we did not have any harvest." 10 years ago, when I was on the island, the greatest threat to the community's prosperity was HIV. Now, there isn't even enough room on the page for that issue, because the greatest threat to the community's prosperity is the very fact that there is not enough food to go around. Due to longer, more intense periods of drought caused by climate change, the people on Rusinga Island can no longer focus all of their energy into addressing HIV and raising the status of women, because they have to focus all of their energy into figuring out where their next meal is going to come from. Just a few weeks ago, CNN featured a story that looked really familiar. On their Instagram page, it looked like this. It reads, "Climate breakdown is fueling a rise in violence against women." And below, it cites an example from Eastern and Southern Africa where fishermen refuse to sell fish to women unless they engage in sex. Fishermen refuse to sell fish to women unless they engage in sex. Unless these women participate in the risky act of sex, they risk starvation for themselves, for their children, because in this drought-struck land, there is no other sustainable source of food. My entire life, I cared about gender inequality. I've committed my entire career to breaking down the barriers for women so that they could achieve just a little bit more, so that they could live healthier lives. Becoming a climate activist never even occurred to me. Environmentalism felt so far removed from the cause I was fighting for. I have always cared about nature, I've always loved wildlife, but I was already committed to a cause and I did not see the connection between the two. At least I didn't until I absolutely had to. Until it was so obvious that I couldn't ignore it anymore, because as it turns out, climate change poses an existential threat to the status of women. You see, because women are still not equal to men, because our patriarchal societies were not designed for us, women still face tremendous barriers to achieving true equality and living healthy lives. And if climate change continues on unchecked, if we do nothing to curb our global emissions and ensure the long-term health of our planet, then resources like food and fresh water will only become more scarce. And when there are fewer resources for all of us to share, those in power, who are traditionally men, will work even harder to maintain the imbalances that keep them in power and in control of those resources. In other words, the barriers for women and all marginalized people will only get higher. We are already seeing this all over the world. Longer, more intense periods of drought, like the ones on Rusinga Island, are ruining harvests and making food more difficult to come by. And in our patriarchal societies, where women often eat last and least, women will face increased rates of malnutrition, not to mention sexual exploitation. We are already experiencing stronger storms like Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Sandy. These storms have the power to flood entire communities and force mass evacuations. And in our patriarchal societies, where women already face increased rates of domestic and sexual violence, it will be women who face an increased risk of violence when they are displaced from their homes. Just this past year, we witness what our climate inaction can do to an entire continent. Stronger forest and bushfires like the ones that just devastated Australia, they can destroy entire regions. And in our patriarchal societies, where women have less access to financial resources like high-wage jobs and loans, women are less likely to rebuild a house. They are more likely to experience long-term homelessness. Just as the people on Rusinga Island had to face their gender inequality issue in order to make any progress against their health crisis, we absolutely must confront our climate crisis if we are ever going to make progress for equality again. Protecting our environment is foundational to our fight for equal rights. If we care about gender equality, if we care about equality for anyone, then we have to care about climate action. We can no longer have one without the other. This might sound really overwhelming to you. It might sound completely undoable and like an impossible problem. Like me, you might not be a climate scientist. I, for one, was extremely intimidated when I came to the realization that if I wanted to make progress for women, I would also have to stand for the protection of our environment. But the people on Rusinga Island were probably intimidated. They were probably overwhelmed, maybe even a little scared, when they came to the realization that if they wanted to make any progress against HIV, they would have to look at their culture's very gender roles. And in the face of what felt impossible, in the face of what felt like an overwhelming problem, they decided to confront it, to come up with creative solutions, to take responsibility for what was in their control, and to do it together. And that is exactly what we can do. Through our personal lives, through our professions, and with the power we have over influential institutions, we can collectively leverage our individual action to create the change we seek. In our personal lives, we have to confront our individual carbon footprints. We have to look at our waste and our consumption. Do we even know where our food and our resources come from, how they are made, where they go when they leave our homes? Do we actually ask ourselves to reuse, renew, and recycle at every given opportunity? Do you? Through our professions, we have to look at how our industries impact the climate. It will take individual behavior change, yes. We have to recycle more. You gotta stop printing single-sided. But more than that, we have to look at the points of intersection between what we do and the climate movement. How can you be a change maker in your business, in your tech startup, in your classroom? How can you elevate the conversation around the climate movement in the space that you are committed to? And finally, we have to use our power. We have to use the power we have to influence the major institutions that have an effect, that have a voice on the global stage. Our vote matters. Where we invest our money matters. Who we donate to, it matters. How you use your voice and how you use your activism, it matters. It might feel like we face an impossible problem. A problem that is forcing us to look at our very culture and beliefs and reevaluate our priorities in order to save our future. But in the face of their impossible problem, the people of Rusinga Island decided to confront it. They decided to come up with new creative solutions, to take responsibility for what was in their control, and to do it together. And that is exactly what we will do. Thank you.